Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Promoting Salmon Resilience in a Changing Climate. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Kate Murphy from Fraser Basin Council, and I'm joined with my colleague, Elena Chia, who is going to be our technical wizard behind the scenes today. We also have our wonderful panelists, who I will introduce more in full in a little bit. Next slide, please. I'm joining you from the territories of Tsawwassen Nation, Musqueam Nation, Kwantlen Nation, Katzie Nation, Stolo Nation, and Stamanis Nation in Ladner, British Columbia. This is a photo very near my home, a little bit of the Fraser River. And as a Dutch and Irish settler who is an uninvited guest in these lands, I know that I have responsibilities to further reconciliation both in my personal life and also in my work, and really strive to deconstruct the colonial structures that still permeate our society today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining from the territories that you hail from as well. So this webinar is brought to you by the BC Regional Adaptation Collaborative, which supports local governments, Indigenous nations, and industries in planning for climate change adaptation. We also have an online website at retooling.ca that has a database of resources on adaptation. And on the next slide, I'll just highlight, we have a newsletter. Next slide, please. And you can click one more time. Elena's guiding us through the PowerPoint because mine just broke this morning and was not showing. So thank you so much, Elena, for doing this. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for that gives adaptation information regularly on events, opportunities, funding, and general information for British Columbia. Next slide. We also have webinars that we regularly do, including this one, and we post them all online. So yes, this one will be posted online and you can find it afterwards. We will send you the link. Next slide, please. Just a few logistics. Please keep your audio muted. If you ask any questions, feel free to at any time during this. You can put it in the question box in your control panel. And for technical difficulties, Elena will be available through the question box or at fraserbasin@gmail.com. So feel free to connect with her either of those ways if you're experiencing issues. Next slide. So I'm very excited to present our first speaker here today, Dionne Bunsha. I will just grab her bio from my slides. Dionne Bunsha is the Climate Adapt and Aboriginal Knowledge Coordinator at the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, which is an alliance of 30 First Nations from Yale to Tsawwassen. She did her master's in resource management from Simon Fraser University, and before moving to Vancouver, Dionne was an environmental and human rights journalist in India. She lives close to the North Shore Mountains and enjoys trail running, hiking, and paddleboarding. Thank you, Dionne, for joining us today. Next slide. So Aaron Hill is our second speaker today, and we're very lucky that he can join as Lena Aziz unfortunately was not able to present today. So thank you, Aaron, for subbing in for this. Aaron Hill is the Executive Director of Watershed Watch Salmon Society, which is a science-based charity that advocates for BC's wild salmon and their habitats. Prior to joining Watershed Watch in 2008, Aaron worked as a fisheries observer and research consultant, and his graduate research focused on the ecology of Pacific salmon ecosystems. Next slide. Our third speaker today is Dan Straker, who is the project manager for the Resilient Waters Project. Dan is a settler of European ancestry, growing up on the unceded lands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. For the last 10 years, he has worked in various roles with environmental NGOs in the Lower Mainland, and this spring will be finishing a Master's of Resource and Environmental Management, where he worked with SFU's Adaptation to Climate Change team, investigating a regional and interdisciplinary approach to green infrastructure as a response to biodiversity loss and climate change in Metro Vancouver. Because we have limited time on this webinar, the presenters will be speaking to overarching climate impacts on salmon and will focus on speaking about their particular salmon resilience projects. So for this reason, if you go to your GoToWebinar control panel, you can find 2 handouts that have much more detailed information on climate impacts to salmon if you're interested in delving into that further. So feel free to download those. So now we will pass it over to Dionne for the first presentation.
Hi, everyone. Can you see the screen, Kate?
Great, yes.
Okay, I'm just adjusting. Okay, thank you, Kate, for organizing this event and bringing us all together today. And thanks everyone for joining us. It seems that people from all over BC, so it's great to see you all. I'd just like to talk a little bit about the Climate Adapt project that the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance is doing. But before that, Kate has also asked me to talk a little bit about the importance of salmon and the impacts of climate change on salmon. So I'll be going into that in a very general way because, as you all know, there are lots of interrelated impacts and forgive me if I do not get into the complexity that it demands due to the lack of time. So I'll just start by introducing our organization. The Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance is a voice for the First Nations of the Lower Fraser River. We have 30 First Nation members from Tuasin to Yale, and our members work collaboratively to manage our fishery and support cultural and spiritual traditions for future generations. We work closely with a lot of other organizations that also are concerned about salmon and salmon watersheds, and we have worked with DFO on issues related to fisheries management as well as restoration projects. So why are salmon important? So as we all know, salmon are a keystone species and are very important for food webs and also watershed health. They transport vital nutrients from the ocean to land and into the forests, and they sustain around 137 wildlife species in the Pacific Northwest at some stage of their life cycle. Salmon watersheds provide clean drinking water and absorb carbon that slows down climate change, and they support a huge economy, jobs, and communities that are dependent on this economy. Salmon are really important for First Nations people who consider it a life-sustaining force. Before colonization, First Nations people, the majority of their diet was salmon, and their whole lifestyle and subsistence revolved around salmon, and it's a very key part of First Nations culture even today. This is just a diagram that kind of graphically shows all the around 130 species that are dependent on salmon throughout the watersheds from the ocean to the forest. So just a brief overview of the various impacts that climate change is going to have in the Lower Fraser, which is where we are located. So there's going to be higher water temperature, and this impacts summer migration, especially sockeye who migrate in the summer. And as we all know, sockeye is in crisis, and we've seen declines never seen before right now. There's also going to be changes in precipitation. So we're going to see wetter winters, stronger winter storms. Again, these, destroy salmon redds. They wash away the redds. They affect salmon habitat. They result in more suspended sediment, which all impact salmon at different stages of their life cycle. There's also changes in water flows. So there's going to be higher freshets due to the melting of the glaciers and lower flows in the summer because of higher temperatures. Again, this affects salmon in different ways. So the higher freshets, again, wash away reds and could just block certain parts or bring contaminants that were previously not on land into the water. And then in the summer, the lower flows, make it more difficult for salmon to come up the river, and also affect their physiology because of the higher temperatures. So more intense winter storms and higher precipitation also lead to landslides, which can again block salmon passage, affect habitat, higher sediment, suspension, all these things. Floods due to sea level rise and higher freshet. So in Metro Vancouver, there's supposed to be a 1 meter rise by 2100, and this is again going to have impacts on salmon habitat. Increased wildfires lead to a loss of vegetation, and this leads to higher stream temperatures, which again affects salmon and their ability to survive in higher temperatures. Increased sediment and woody debris in water are also a result of increased wildfires, which damage fish health and habitat. In the ocean, there's ocean acidification due to climate change, and this impacts fish physiology as well as plankton that affect the entire marine food web. And there's been a lot of talk of a warm blob in the Pacific, which is basically a marine heat wave that is in the Pacific off North America and has affected salmon survival and has reduced salmon growth and has affected the entire food web, marine food web. So unfortunately, due to time, I am not able to go into all the various interrelated impacts, that these kind of climate change related impacts will have on salmon, but generally they affect salmon physiology, habitat, migration, nutrient availability, and sediment levels in various ways, all of which have an impact on salmon. In 2019, DFO released a State of Salmon report. And this report has many observations. I just thought I'd summarize some of the key observations that were made. One is that broadly, climate change has impacted Pacific salmon at every stage of their life cycle in both the marine and freshwater ecosystems. What was interesting is how DFO summarized the various impacts that climate change has on different salmon species. So Chinook are declining throughout their range. Sockeye and coho abundance are declining, particularly in the lower latitudes. Salmon that spend less time in fresh water, like the pink, the chum, the river type sockeye, and ocean type Chinook, are generally not exhibiting declines. And salmon populations that have generally not shown declines in recent years share some common traits. So they spawn further north, they spend less time in fresh water, they use largely undisturbed freshwater habitats, and are more flexible to spawn in a range of locations and habitats. So all these changes that are happening in the freshwater systems prompted us to kind of look at how we should be responding to the impacts of climate change on salmon. And the LFFA decided to start the Climate Adapt project to create, which would lead to the creation of a First Nations-led adaptation plan to deal with impacts of climate change on fish and fish habitat. This was prompted basically by what we felt was a need that was missing. A lot of climate change adaptation projects in the lower mainland were looking at the impacts on human infrastructure, but not looking at the ecosystem and environmental changes that were taking place. So we wanted to address those. As you know, the lower mainland and the Fraser Valley area already is one of the most highly impacted ecosystems in Canada. We have several cumulative impacts on fish and fish habitat due to human development, whether it's residential development, industrial development, ports, lots of pollution due to all these various activities, forestry and mining and farming further in the valley and up in the canyon. So this project focuses on identifying the priority areas where resilience planning is needed and will provide the greatest positive impacts. These are the various phases of the project. We started in 2017 just by collecting data that we thought was necessary to understand what the impact of salmon were. Collected scientific data related to important salmon values, so understanding fish presence, quality areas were to kind of focus on for adaptation. And we are now at the stage where, based on all these meetings and inputs, we are prioritizing actions to be taken to adapt to climate change. We are working with ESSA Consulting and the Pacific Salmon Foundation on this prioritization process, and ESSA is leading kind of workshops for First Nations to prioritize the various actions that we'd like to see happen. ESSA has a lot of experience working on similar projects in BC. So this is just a list of the various values and threats that we mapped, and all these maps are available on our website. It's called climateadapt.lffamaps.ca. A lot of the mapping work was done by Zoetica Environmental Consulting Services, and the website was created by Culture Code. I'm just going to show you a few maps that are on the website. So this is a map of the Chinook productivity based on USAID's data. As you can see, we've kind of ranked areas of higher Chinook presence and lower presence, so we know which areas have higher numbers and where we could focus our efforts. We've also mapped threats. So this is just an example of a riparian buffers map that was marked, and I've zoomed in so that you can see, where riparian buffers are insufficient. They are kind of marked in red and orange, and the ones that are have a sufficient riparian buffer are in green. They also show the land use in that particular area, so it indicates whether it's an urban area or whether it's an area that may have agriculture or forestry. So this helps with planning to kind of improve riparian buffers in different parts of the Lower Fraser. Again, this is on our website, which I've indicated in the slides. So for our prioritization process, we decided to kind of take a more systems approach and look at the various stages of the salmon life cycle, and what environmental factors are important at each stage. So as you can see, the important environmental conditions are in the darker gray boxes, and the kind of human activities or restoration actions that affect those environmental conditions are in the light gray boxes. So, for example, in the early stages of the salmon life cycle, sediment, gravel quality, temperature, flow, and oxygen are really important. And human activities that affect these environmental conditions are land use, grazing, roads, flow management, gravel extraction, and contamination. So these are things that we could focus on to improve those conditions for salmon. The strategies we looked at were classified by ESSA into two: hard and soft adaptation strategies. Hard adaptation strategies are basically engineering solutions, things that we can do to improve stream flow, remove barriers to salmon passage, probably protect areas better and also improve human use. So things like improving forestry practices, implementing low impact grazing practices, things like that. And then the soft adaptation strategies are strategies that are more policy oriented and related to habitat protection, water sustainability planning, fisheries management, and water stewardship. So these would be things like, increasing the number of protected areas, or improving water sustainability planning, entrenching ecosystem rights to water, or adjusting fisheries management practices. This is a diagram that just shows the process of prioritization that we are undertaking. So it's an indicator-based approach, which it finds indicators that kind of characterize the sensitivity of salmon, the exposure to various environmental risks, as well as adaptive capacity. So using these indicators, we can narrow down to the options that will be most effective. Sorry. Finally, just to summarize, I think climate change gives us an opportunity to look at cumulative impacts and think of ecosystems as a whole. There are opportunities to change the way we manage floods, infrastructure, urban development, agriculture, and forestry. And there's also opportunities to implement and amend policy for sustainable development, sustainable water use, agriculture, and forestry. All of this involves several government jurisdictions and stakeholders, and that therefore there's a huge need for collaborative stewardship and governance in this region. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening and invite questions, if any.
Thank you so much, Dionne. So feel
Thank
free.
you.
Thank you. I'll ask you a couple questions, Dionne, before we move on to Erin, and I invite participants to add your questions in the question box. So Dionne, a question for you. What communications approaches work best for emphasizing the importance of consideration of fish and fish habitat during decision-making in and around watercourses?
I think relating how the quality of the ecosystems is so intricately related to fish health is important, as well as highlighting the ecosystem services that nature provides to human survival is important.
Thank you.
So making people relate to the whole process of how salmon and ecosystem health are directly related to our health and our lives.
Great. Thank you for that. Another question, is there an intention to move towards implementation of restoration activities in this project?
Yes, definitely. So Kate, we're in the final stages of our prioritization process. By the end of February, we should have a report out with several recommendations, and in the coming year, so in a fiscal year, so which would be by April, we should start looking at implementing those recommendations. So there would be a list of restoration projects that would be undertaken, as well as other kind of avenues to improve policy or improve collaboration with different stakeholders. And yeah, it's
Great.
exciting.
Yes, it is exciting. I look forward to hearing about that. Dionne, another question, and you shared this PDF, so you're the right person to ask. Who authored the PDF Climate Change Impacts on Salmon that's linked in the chat window?
I just put it together for our members during one of our meetings. So
So
It's not a
you authored
complete
it.
list. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, by the way.
So,
All right, one more and then I'll pass it over to Aaron for his presentation. Dionne, you described 2 adaptation strategies. Where does nature-based solutions fall?
I guess it would depend on what kind of nature-based solution you're looking at. But so the nature-based solutions that look more at things like, improving dikes to make them more green in that sense would fall in the engineering or hard adaptation strategies. Because what you're doing is you're taking existing infrastructure and trying to improve it in some way. Whereas I think if you're planning for new infrastructure, that could fall in the soft adaptation strategies because you're changing the way policy is done, is kind of implemented in the future.
So the nature-based solutions, are you saying those would be the soft ones that are changing the future rather than what we've been doing before?
Well, it depends on what you're doing. Like I said, if you're actually for example, taking a dike that exists and trying to improve it in some way, it's more considered what they call a hard infrastructure or like a engineering solution. Whereas if you're changing policy to ensure that nature-based solutions are implemented on a broader scale, you're actually changing policy, so it would be considered a soft adaptation strategy because the implication is much wider. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
great.
Thank you, Dionne. And
Thanks.
there's a few more. Oh, there's also a thanks to the one of the questions you answered. There's a few more questions for you, but I'm gonna save those till the end. So we'll have a group Q&A after Aaron and Dan present. So Aaron, before I pass it over to you, Dionne had a poll question for attendees just to get your opinions. So what is one thing you would like to see done to conserve salmon? I'll give you maybe 30 seconds for this.
Okay, there's a message from Dan saying you can't seem to select the checkbox.
Yes, I think panelists aren't allowed to vote. So Dan, during your presentation, if you'd like to verbally say what you want done, feel free. In the meantime, I'm sorry you weren't able to check the checkbox. But for attendees who were able to, Dionne, it looks like the majority would like to make urban development more salmon friendly with stricter regulations. I'll actually put in a program that my colleague works on, salmon-safe, that you might want to look into. There's a lot of interest in more vegetation in riparian and other areas, and interest in the other options as well, of course. They're all very important. So thank you for voting, and we will turn it now over to Aaron.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll just open my presentation here. Oops, started in the middle. So this is, yeah, a little inkling of how this presentation is going to go. As Dionne mentioned, or not, sorry, not Dionne, as Kate mentioned, I'm subbing in at the last minute here for my colleague Lena. So it could be a little bit rocky, but I'll give it my best shot. Now, is it showing all of my icons and stuff at the bottom, or are you getting a full screen view?
It's showing your icons, but I can see your PowerPoint just fine. And if you click on your PowerPoint, those might disappear. Yeah, they've disappeared.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, my name is Aaron. I'm with Watershed Watch Salmon Society, and Kate mentioned that we're a charity that advocates for BC's wild salmon and their habitats. And I'm talking to you today from Songhees and Esquimalt territory in the city of Victoria. And I'm gonna sort of get started here with some just overarching stuff about impacts to salmon and habitat and stuff. And Dionne already went through some of this, so I'll skim through it pretty quickly and then get on to some solutions that we're advocating for with respect to habitat. So yeah, there are a lot of challenges to salmon that we're all pretty familiar with. Climate change is really the big one, but it's exacerbating and being exacerbated by all of the other threats that we know about. Pollution, over-extraction of water, pathogens from fish farms, hatcheries, impacts from salmon hatcheries like genetic introgression and competition, predation and overfishing, and natural disasters like the Big Bar landslide. We're seeing dramatically lower salmon runs recently than we have. Well, they're just declining. Some quick stats here showing the scope of the decline on Fraser salmon, and predictions are that it's not going to get better anytime soon. And we now have dozens of populations of Fraser River salmon designated as endangered or threatened by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, COSEWIC. That includes interior Fraser River steelhead, interior Fraser coho, and multiple populations of Chinook and sockeye. And the declines in salmon are strongly correlated with global warming and specifically warming in marine and freshwater salmon habitats over the last century. And so, a theme of this talk is resilience of wild salmon and how we can foster more resilience for wild salmon in the face of climate change and these huge challenges that they're facing. And some of those challenges in the physical realm are reduced peak and summer flows in the Fraser River and earlier time freshets, increased winter flows and associated scouring and sedimentation of habitats, and geomorphic changes, hydrological changes and geomorphological changes, like changes to the sedimentation regime that are exacerbated by logging, bug kill, and forest fires and other changes to the landscape. And urbanization, I guess, when you're in the lower Fraser Valley. We're seeing dramatically increased stream temperatures in the summertime, and big changes to salinity, temperature, and wind regimes and stuff within the Fraser River estuary and the Salish Sea. And these are all having profound impacts on our salmon. So the way this is manifesting ecologically in the ocean, we're seeing severely reduced marine survival for many salmon species due to food web effects of climate change, including reduced quantity and quality of the zooplankton prey that they eat in the ocean. We're seeing increased competition and predation due to northward shifts in the distribution of warm water species. Predators of salmon from southern waters that come up and are eating our salmon and competing with them. And our salmon are also having to compete with record numbers of hatchery fish in the North Pacific, where, as the countries of the North Pacific increase their hatchery output, we're basically dumping more and more fish onto an overgrazed pasture. Poor freshwater summer feeding conditions, adult migration delays and mortality due to water flows and temperatures, That's reducing spawning success, and we're also seeing reduced spawning success due to increased sedimentation and scouring, and rapid declines for population spawning and rearing in freshwater areas with serious habitat concerns. So then that's a good segue into the stuff we're seeing in the Lower Fraser Valley. And so there's a number of different things that happen here, but one thing that really is a problem with lack of connectivity is that as these young salmon move down the Fraser watershed out to the ocean, they rely on a lot of off-channel habitats, sloughs and side channels, and the mouths of tributary systems to take refuge and adjust as they move downriver. And when we block off all of these habitats with flood control structures, when the flooding comes, and the flooding is getting worse with climate change, it spits the salmon straight out, and they don't have as much of these habitats to take refuge in. So we mapped this issue in the Lower Fraser a few years ago, and this shows the scale of the problem. So prior to European colonization, the Lower Fraser was this amazing network of nursery habitats that provided all of these off-channel refuges for these wild salmon. And in order to protect communities and farmland from flooding, we built all these dikes with flood control structures on them, with floodgates and pump stations that block off salmon habitat, and the pumps kill fish when they pump the water out from behind the dikes. And you can see that there's a huge amount of salmon habitat that is blocked by these flood control structures. So over 1,500 kilometers of potential habitat blocked by 156 flood control structures was our estimate from the mapping. So this is on top of other impacts to salmon habitat in the Lower Fraser, severe reductions in wetland and floodplain habitat across the floodplain. And at the same time, there are very costly infrastructure upgrades required to address the increased flooding that we're seeing and going to see more of with climate change in many BC communities in the Lower Fraser. And the current flood control structures, many of them they're old, they're undersized, and they need to be upgraded anyways, but they're also blocking the salmon habitat. What a problem is that these flood control structures right now are not required to be sort of nature-based or safe for salmon. And in the Lower Fraser and many other places where flooding is an issue, we have an opportunity to not only protect our communities and farmland better from flooding, but also open up blocked salmon habitats at the same time by using nature-based or salmon-safe flood control infrastructure. So these are just some examples of problematic structures. So I'm just looking at my speaking notes here. So you can see, in the one on the left, there's stagnant water behind this pump station or floodgate or whatever that is. On the right-hand side, you have a slough that's choked with invasive vegetation, and these are both, low in dissolved oxygen, high in pollutants, and not getting the water exchange they need, and they're full of invasive fish species and basically death traps and dead zones for wild salmon when they used to be prime refuges in nursery areas. It's another example of some riprap blocking fish passage on the left, and some floodgates on the right that don't open as they're not opening as they're supposed to allow fish to pass through. And it doesn't have to be like this. There are options that will keep us safe from flooding and also open up these habitats for salmon. And there's just another example is from Catesy Slough and Pitt Meadows, where we're seeing some big fish kills due to the non-fish friendly pumps And the city council there recently approved an application to refurbish their old pumps with, again, pumps that aren't fish friendly. And the reasoning provided was that allowing fish to survive, being the pumps would release invasive fish from the slough into the main stem Fraser and violate the aquatic invasive species regulation. But as most people know, those species already exist in the main stem Fraser, and legal opinion we sought suggested that fish-friendly pumps would not violate that aquatic invasive species regulation, and the use of these fish-killing pumps may actually violate the new Fisheries Act. So anyways, we have a really historic opportunity here to restore and protect wild salmon while ensuring the Lower Fraser communities and farmland are better protected from increasing climate change-induced flooding. And there are lots of solutions available. There's a whole smorgasbord here. Fish-friendly floodgates, fish-friendly pumps, setting dikes back to give the river a little bit of room to flood naturally where that's feasible. Reconnecting side channels and sloughs that don't need to be disconnected for any flood control or public safety purpose. Restoring floodplains and wetlands, buying back floodplain land where it makes sense, and a whole host of other measures. And the cool thing is that we don't have to sort of come up with any of this stuff. I mean, there's many examples of these solutions, green and green-gray measures being implemented in the lower mainland already and across BC, and some really exciting stuff happening in Washington State. And so there's a lot of really successful models to draw on where it's really clear that you can improve flood safety and improve salmon habitat at the same time. This is just an animation. Hopefully the animation comes through in the video, but it just shows how this is a fish unfriendly pump that's grinding up fish and killing them as it pumps the water through. And hopefully I can go to the next one. And this is an example of a couple different models of fish-friendly pumps that, if operated correctly at the appropriate RPMs, will pass fish through much more safely. I mean, there's still some mortality associated, but it's significantly lower. So there's a number of significant benefits from investing in salmon-safe flood control, protecting and rebuilding wild salmon habitat, obviously, and habitat for other fish and wildlife species. This is a major climate adaptation thing, as I think it's probably pretty clear here, in that we're, keeping our communities and farmland safer from flooding. It's also advancing reconciliation, in that First Nations communities are disproportionately impacted by flooding and salmon declines. And as Dionne was describing, these sorts of things are priorities for Lower Fraser and other First Nations. And the economics are really actually pretty good for doing this kind of stuff. There's a lot of studies showing that investment in ecosystem services and nature-based solutions actually generates a lot of economic value and saves money over the long run, and is more efficient and cheaper, and that it creates jobs. There's a number of studies showing that it creates jobs, so I won't go into all those details. And then another benefit that we don't talk about a lot, but it's actually pretty important for people that live in communities by the water, and that it improves our enjoyment of our local waterways. We can change our, these urban side channels and sloughs that are choked with invasive species and full of, garbage and shopping carts and things, into vibrant, thriving little ecosystems that we want to go take our families for canoe rides on and go have picnics beside and go fishing on. There's just some examples of some of the research that's been done to make the case for some of these changes. and there's a lot more where this came from. And I think if anybody's interested in these resources, you can get in touch with us and we can send you lots of stuff. What's really needed to move this forward is there's a number of things. There's the whole flood management issue is really fragmented amongst a number of different federal, provincial, local, regional agencies that don't always work that well together. And we see a lot of agencies really not taking responsibility for advancing things and as well as they could be. There's a number of different funding sources, emergency management funds from the provincial and federal government that don't actually require or prioritize nature-based or fish-friendly solutions. So that really has to change. We need to see, if we have the federal government investing literally hundreds of $millions in salmon restoration on the one hand, and giving away money to municipalities for flood control upgrades on the other hand, and they're allowing practices and structures to be built with that money that actually work against their salmon restoration objectives. It just doesn't make any sense. So we really need to change the criteria for those funding mechanisms to ensure that they're promoting the multiple priorities that government has. And we need to, there's broad support for this amongst, the public, First Nations, the conservation community, and municipalities. I'll talk about that on my next slide, but one place that we'd really like to see this get taken up more is through the Lower Mainland Flood Management Strategy, which could really embrace some of these nature-based solutions more thoroughly. And yeah, it could help advance climate adaptation in the province, which is it's a really huge priority right now for the provincial government through Clean BC and the climate adaptation and preparation strategy that they're developing. And this is a really, it's kind of a no-brainer that we would, when we're having to spend, tens or hundreds of $millions to make our community safer from flooding, that we would try to achieve these multiple objectives. So yeah, there's been two UBCM, Union of BC Municipality resolutions in the last couple of years that have promoted this approach. Just a couple quick excerpts here from the latest one. It was passed by the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, and because of COVID, the conference got cut short, and so it still has to be passed by the UBCM. But it's they're calling for provincial and federal governments to remove constraints and implement requirements for incorporating green infrastructure and nature-based solutions in flood management, and asking for federal and provincial governments to promote natural assets as a viable emergency planning solution and provide appropriate funding. So that's what local governments are calling for. So just to sum up some of the actions that we can take to boost resilience of Lower Fraser and other salmon through habitat restoration and flood control modernization include adopting fish-friendly nature-based flood management solutions and strategies to reduce flood risk and improve protection of floodplain habitats. And again, I think it's really important that the Lower Mainland Flood Management Strategy embraces that. Proactively funding the inclusion of ecological and social objectives through our existing funding programs, and creating dedicated funding sources so that municipalities know that they will be supported when they take this, when they do the right thing by putting in good flood control solutions for salmon. And there's BC's forthcoming watershed security strategy, which was committed to in the provincial election, and priorities around salmon habitat restoration that can really advance this stuff. So we're hoping to see some action there. And updating the Water Sustainability Act regulations, policies, and standards to ensure the effectiveness for the watershed security strategy and this approach in general. And then updating existing flood management technical guidelines would be a huge help, I understand, for the staff, especially at the municipal level, who are charged with figuring this stuff out and implementing it on limited budgets. And basically, we just need strong, clear institutional leadership, political will to move this forward. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I'm going to share your poll, and then we'll pass it over to Dan. By the way, for not having much time, I think less than a full day to prepare for that, that was a really impressive presentation, so much better than I could have done on that much notice.
Well, Lena did most of the work for me already, but thanks.
All right, so I'll give folks about 30 seconds for Aaron's question. What can green flood control look like? Okay, and you are all correct. The answer that they were leaning towards was all of the above, but because it's all of the above, there's no wrong answer. So well done, everyone. And now, Dan, we will pass it over to you. And as you're setting up your presentation, I will run your poll.
Great.
So Dan's poll is roughly how many flood control structures, aka floodgates and pump stations, are on the Lower Fraser River, Richmond to Hope. Again, I'll give you about 30 seconds for that, and Dan can answer what the correct answer was.
Oh, can you still hear me?
Yes. All right, so Dan, the answers came in with 61% at 150.
Hey, Kate, I think you've cut out there on me. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Yep. Can you hear me all right?
Oh, weird. I am not hearing you all of a sudden. This is strange. As soon as I shared the screen.
Huh. Elena, technical guru, can you hear me all right?
There we go. I can hear you now. Sorry about that. Something weird happened with my headphones. Bluetooth.
Yes, it happens. Always at the best times. So
yeah, and you guys are seeing my presentation?
Not quite yet. I can't see myself. Elena, can you see it on your end?
No, I can't see the presentation right now.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Yes, so thanks, Aaron and Dionne. Aaron has really set this presentation up, and as you'll probably notice, there is a lot of overlaps between what Aaron is talking about and what I'm talking about today, and say this is going to be a more specific subset of what Aaron has been talking about. And don't worry, we're going to get to the answer to the question. Unless you already answered it, Kate. I went off audio there for a second.
No, you can answer that. And just to let you know, you just have to switch your display settings or your screens.
Perfect.
But yes, please feel free to answer it.
Swap. Is that working? Is it swapped yet?
Not quite yet.
That's very strange. Huh. Okay, let me try this one more time.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, everyone. This worked well in the test, and then isn't working now.
It always works in the test. There we are. Perfect.
Here we go. Okay, perfect. Here we go. So we're going to be talking about a particular intervention that Aaron was speaking to, which is about flood control infrastructure and the project that I'm working on, Resilient Waters. So as Aaron alluded to in their 2018 study with Watershed Watch, they identified 156 flood control structures, 250 kilometers of dikes, and 15 kilometers of habitat that were trapped. And in June 2019, Watershed Watch actually hosted a 2-day workshop, which they entitled Resilient Waters, Managing Floods for All. Now, you can actually go and find this report. I will provide the link to it maybe after to Kate, but this really summarized a lot of the technical, governance and regulatory and funding issues going on in terms of flood management and salmon resilience. And it really brought together a lot of different sectors to talk about this issue. So folks from the fishery side of things, the agriculture, biology, local governments, and First Nations. And this is really the impetus for what brought Resilient Waters to be. I'd say also important to note when Aaron mentioned that there was a lot of good work happening in Washington, one of the aspirations and one of the presenters on the day at that workshop was a group called Floodplains by Design, which is quite a unique kind of arrangement, a public-private partnership between the state of Washington and the Nature Conservancy. And they are working to change the management paradigm around floodplain management. So this is kind of an aspirational goal, and it kind of touches on what Aaron was discussing when he mentioned the issue of siloed thinking in floodplain management. And then just to bring it back, so after that workshop in 2019, Watershed Watch approached Makeway, which is formerly Tides Canada, to basically host a project. And so Resilient Waters was born. We got funding from the DFO Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund. And just to kind of draw a clear boundary, because it can be a bit confusing, when it comes to Connected Waters and Watershed Watch, they are dealing with the systems change kind of aspects and the advocacy and education that Aaron was speaking to. The Resilient Waters project is really focused on implementation and intervention. And it's this niche kind of scale of intervention, which is identifying and scoping key restoration opportunities that involve just flood infrastructure. So pump stations, floodgates, and dikes. And then working on these site-specific flood infrastructure upgrades and restoration with First Nations and local government partnerships, and then kind of as side benefits, doing research and monitoring to advance some of the solutions in terms of fish-friendly flood infrastructure. So as Aaron and Lena, or as Aaron particularly identified, there is this opportunity. Because we have a lot of aging flood control infrastructure, most of it was built like in the post-war boom of 1950 to 1970. A lot of it is reaching the end of service life and wasn't really built with climate change in mind, or fish for that matter. So there is this unique opportunity to start to implement some of these newer fish-friendlier designs. And just to highlight, kind of the importance of floodplain and off-channel habitats that are cut off by these flood infrastructure. This is very supported by salmon science, and these off-channels provide these really important overwintering habitat, particularly for these out-migrating juvenile salmon, and especially Chinook, providing that opportunity for food and refuge and rest on their way out of the Fraser into the Pacific Ocean. And also this really important aspect of adjusting to salinity as they get closer to the estuary, because if they get dumped too quickly into that salt, then it can be quite a shock to the system. So these off-channel habitats give them that opportunity as they move down the river. Aaron showed off an animation of the pump station issue, so I'll just show off quickly kind of like the floodgate issue. So some of you might be familiar with these top-mounted floodgates. And the problem with these guys is they basically are only open for a very short time when the differential between the stream side and the river side of the water is so great that it forces the gate open. Now this leaves like very little time for salmon to both migrate into streams and for salmon to migrate out of the stream. So on the left side, you see there a typical top-mounted gate on a flood box. On the right side, we have a tide regulated gate. So this is like, there's a variety of different ways to do this and lots of different kinds of solutions for every situation. In this case, side mounted gates are often better because they're side hinged, so they'll be open more often, easier to open. This one in particular has sensors that can detect when the water level reaches a certain point, it can open and close. So these are some of the ones that are being deployed around. There's 2 of these in the Lower Mainland, one on Musqueam Creek, I believe, and one on at Colony Farm in the Coquitlam River. So a little bit about kind of the 3 pillars of the Resilient Waters project. I'd say the majority of what we do is this restoration, the restoration aspect. So we spent most of 2020 working to identify projects, establish partnerships, again, with local governments and First Nations, like we said, doing convening between often First Nations and local governments and other stakeholders to talk about priorities and alignment. Also providing some extra services like fundraising or connecting stakeholders to funds to do these, and then really meeting folks where they're at in terms of what capacity they need. Some are able to just kind of pick up the project where it is, or in some cases, Resilient Waters might take the lead on these projects. As part of that, just building and working in a cross-sector network. So collaborating with other NGOs, academics, again, like I said, local governments and First Nations, other levels of government, and opening up these opportunities for shared learning. Like a lot of you folks on this group right now are that cross-sector network, and a lot of overlaps there, I'm sure. And we've been having our own series of webinars that open up the door to hear about local and international solutions to this issue of fish passage and flood management. And you can find those on our website. And then this 3rd pillar of our work, doing research. So the baseline and post-construction monitoring, we're working with Mike Pearson and Pearson Ecological, taking the lead on these aspects in most cases. And we'll be looking at about 20 different sites and getting fish and habitat data about that. We're doing some specialized research projects, one with UBC and Scott Hinch at the Colony Farm gate to look at this self-regulating gate and see how effective it is at passing fish. Another one with SFU and Sean Chartrand to look at kind of how wetlands are evolve under different flow regimes, whether that's sea level rise or increased flooding, or even just changing the configuration of flood infrastructure or dike breaches, that kind of thing. And then we hope to build a best practices kind of manual for different audiences that focuses on the kinds of solutions that work for flood infrastructure and fish and farms and that kind of thing. I'm not going to get too much into this. I know that's a lot of stuff going on, but basically to show what our typical project restoration process looks like. It started out with some desktop review, looking at a lot of the documents and research that's already been done to identify some of these pieces of flood infrastructure, and there has been a lot. And so we're trying to take it forward, doing some field recon to see what the status of those pieces of flood infrastructure looks like. From that, we built a project shortlist. And then it's kind of gets into this iterative process now where we are talking with First Nations and local governments and other stakeholders about site-specific restoration. We had to postpone our field work in 2020, and it's been moved to 2021. So that's when that will be happening. Providing these different services, and then getting into kind of these feasibility, design, and permitting, and then construction and restoration for these different pieces of flood infrastructure. And then, of course, following up with post-construction effectiveness monitoring. And you can see we've got a little iterative loop going on there. In terms of how we prioritized sites, I don't want to get too much into this as well, but it has a lot to do as we went through our process. We are really trying to balance the ecological with the feasibility of the engineering and the costs and the socio-cultural aspects, First Nations priorities especially, seeing this as a window to really work in a reconciliatory way. And at the end of the day, in a lot of cases, it really comes down to the political support that we can muster in any given place and the window of opportunity to move on a project. So we do have a series of projects that we're working on and moving forward with that try to work in a balance of all of these. So here is a map showing the 25 different sites that we ended up with as a short list. And you can find that at the link above, resilientwaters.ca. Just for a quick example of the kind of project that we're working on, so Backwash Slough Ferry Island, which is out in Chilliwack, just next to the Rosedale Highway. There's a slough there just off of the Chiam First Nation Reserve, and there is an opportunity to basically put a hole in a causeway to reconnect 8 hectares of slough habitat. And in this case, it's really fortunate. Chiam Nation is very interested. In fact, they're basically the one that, that recommended this project, and it ticks off all those boxes. And so we look forward to working on this over the next 3 years to put this into place. And there's lots of great future opportunities to connect into different sloughs that run through Chilliwack, particularly Hope Slough, if you're familiar with the area in the future. Just a little over the head map there. In terms of the monitoring, working with Mike Pearson, he's going to be producing these kind of site report cards that give us an indication of how the fish are doing, what kind of habitat indicators are going on there, water quality, and also just how the flood infrastructure itself is operating, like when is it open, when is it closed, is it hurting fish, that kind of thing. So I won't leave that up too long, but we hope to have these and share them with our network by the end of the summer or into the fall of this year. And then just kind of how the project is unrolling. So 2020, we spent most of the time IDing projects and forming those partnerships and that cross-sector network. In 2021, we will be doing our baseline monitoring and we'll begin that implementation, doing the planning and feasibility with the partners in 2022, and basically 2022 to 2024, depending on the project, will be in some variation of design and construction and post-construction monitoring. And then we hope to carry on Resilient Waters beyond this and continue to add projects to it and plug funding in and make these things happen. And that's really it. And I didn't mention this, but okay, we are working closely with Patrick Lilly, a salmon biologist at Kerwood Lydell Engineers. And we are also very glad to be having funding from the Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund, as well as the Pacific Salmon Foundation. And you do feel free to get in touch with me by email. There's my email at the bottom there, or visit our website. And that's it from me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Dan. Great presentation from everyone. And if I could have all the speakers turn on their cameras again, and we will do a Q&A for everyone. And actually, since you talked about your email address, Dan, I want to make note, Lena can also share her email address. And Dionne, are you all right with sharing yours with attendees as well?
Yes, definitely, thanks.
Okay, I'll just post those for folks in the chat. So those have been shared. All right, so we do have a number of questions for folks. So Dan, since you just went, I'll start with you and then I'll rotate. Is there evidence to support larger fish behavior and predator behavior adapts to these flood box gates? For example, would predators not sit at these gates waiting for fry or smolts to move in and out?
Oh yeah, good question. And I would say I'm not the best person to answer it. A person like Mike Pearson would have really good answers to this. I think there has been evidence that that can happen. But that's about as much as I can say. I don't think it's problematic enough to not make these restoration projects happen. That's what I'd say. But I'd also be interested to see if Aaron or Dionne has something to say about that.
Aaron or Dionne, would you? Yeah.
Were you gonna respond, Dionne?
No, I don't think I have the engineering expertise for that.
Yeah, I'm saying I don't know the extent to which that'd be a problem, but I guess I'd mentioned that the way things are now facilitates some other predator traps where, you know, the fish don't have these refuges to duck into as they migrate down the Fraser, and they get spit out into the estuary where they're really susceptible to a lot of different predators out there. So even if that is an issue, I think you'd have to weigh it against the benefit from removing the risk from these other predation sources that we see now.
And actually, now that you mentioned that, Aaron, it reminds me that basically because these fish-friendlier designs try to make the timing more consistent, so that there's a lot more opportunity for movement through the structures, it probably reduces that predatory situation, because in the other cases I think Aaron alluded to, the timing window is very short, so predators can basically be conditioned to wait for those timings. But there's probably a lot of people with better answers even in this in the audience today that might know better than that.
Well, thank you both for taking a stab at that one anyways. Aaron, I'm going to go over to you. There was a question, what about more headwater storage so water can be released when it is needed?
So I guess is that, I wonder if that's a question for about regulated waterways, so systems with dams on them. I mean, that's if so, that's certainly something that needs to be looked at. And I mean, there's a lot of problems there. I think it's probably better now than it has been, but with inappropriate water release regimes in regulated water systems, you know, hydro. And yeah, that's definitely part of the solution. It just has to be done in an ecologically appropriate way to make sure that you're not harming one set of values by releasing more water during the summer for fish. I don't know if Dionne or Dan have an answer to that as well.
Dionne, I see you nodding. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I guess just reiterate what Aaron said. I haven't heard of. I mean, there have been some proposed solutions like creating storage areas for water and stuff like that. But I just wonder about, you know, any human intervention actually creating more trouble than it seeks to actually remediate. So. Yeah.
Great. Thank you both. Dionne, actually, now that you were just speaking, I will turn another question over to you. There is a specific question regarding the Chinook productivity layer. This questioner asks, for the Chinook productivity layer, did this include traditional knowledge of Chinook presence in addition to, and I don't know this acronym myself, but it's NUSED's data?
No, it doesn't include traditional knowledge. What we did was actually just work with the NUSED's data, but there were a lot of kind of problems with the data. So we worked with DFO data analysts to actually remove the errors. So it's a kind of revised NUSED's data set that we have with some of the kind of problems with it. We've tried to address some of the problems with it, and we've also included things like, say, the main stem has obviously been given higher priority because these are areas for fish passage and obviously important. So I could send you the detailed methodology of how we kind of came to these rankings if you'd like, and you could pass it on to, yeah, or they could contact me directly.
Yes, the person who asked this question, if you'd like that detailed methodology, please do let us know, and we'll be in touch. Also, Lena is happily amongst our attendees, and she mentioned that potentially better forest management would create better water storage. So that's her kind of take on the previous question as well. Erin, I'm going to pass it back to you again. One of the attendees said, you speak of the solution being habitat restoration to address climate change. Recognizing change, one must not consider restoration, but rather resilience and rehabilitation. Would you not agree that the idea of restoration must be denounced as being unattainable? Should not more action be centered to rehabilitation and resilience?
Yeah, I mean, restoration is, I would argue, I think that restoration certainly is attainable in some situations. I also agree, I mean, that given the scale of the climate crisis and the impacts that we're seeing, that there is, things are never going to be the way they were. So in that sense, it's true, and we do need to really focus on imbuing our salmon populations with the resilience they need to withstand the pressures of climate change and all the other stuff that we're throwing at them. So yeah, and I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind, in all decisions that we make about wild salmon, and how we're really maximizing their resilience, whether it's decisions about hatchery augmentation, where their genetic fitness can be degraded through hatchery propagation, or fishing management decisions where we're reducing the spawning biomass below critical thresholds and things like that. Absolutely, good point.
Thanks for that detailed answer. Dan and Dionne, I also wanted to ask if you wanted to answer that question.
I guess, yeah, I don't have a ton of thoughts other than to say I don't think there's anybody's kind of fooling themselves into thinking that we're going to restore habitats to what they were. We kind of have to acknowledge what the new state is like and work with that. Having said that, I mean, if you look at some of the projects going on in Washington, that is more like making room for the river and doing setbacks and things like this in the floodplain than you are going towards a more naturalized state and allowing, basically more natural channelization and meandering to happen. But it's always going to be on a spectrum, I guess.
Thank you. Dionne, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, just reinforcing what Aaron and Dan have said, I don't think anyone thinks that we're going to go back to the pristine kind of habitat that existed in the past, but it's just an attempt to improve it. So we could call it rehabilitation or restoration. I think the reason why we call it restoration is they're trying to recreate the kind of condition that existed before, whether it's in terms of salmon passage or structure in the river. So it's just an attempt to bring it as close to it existed, but obviously it's not going to be an exact habitat that existed in the past.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those answers. There was a question that came in, is agricultural runoff a problem for refuge areas in the Fraser Valley? This attendee notes that I saw some slides, some sites, I imagine, with heavy infestation of aquatic weeds like parrot's feather, which like nutrient-rich water. I'll leave that open for anybody who wants to jump in quickly.
I can go. Basically, I think Lena might know more about this than I do, but I think yes, definitely. And certainly when we're considering which sites we would restore or rehabilitate, that is a big consideration about kind of how much agricultural runoff is going on in those channels. And also, what is the potential for kind of moving towards some nature-based kind of agricultural practices, because there are ways of doing that. The Farmland Advantage program that Dave Zender runs, for instance. But yeah, this is a big consideration. We don't want to be bringing salmon into a habitat that is not going to be healthy for them to be living in.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, Lena, Dan, I see that she has sent a message saying, yes, this is a huge issue and we're working with the Ministry of Agriculture and some local farmers to improve it. That's why we want to improve flow through these blockages of pump stations and flood boxes, etc. Thank you, Lena and Dan, for co-answering that. All right, some other questions, and they're not directed to anyone in particular, so I will let you all jump in, but maybe try and sound off so that each of you get a chance. So one of them, should there not be more pressure placed on governments to decommission dams and remove them to allow for natural environments to reestablish themselves and allow for salmon populations to travel in waterways as they did prior to human disturbance and interference? They note in particular the Site C Dam and how it might have impacted, how it has impacted salmon.
Aaron, are you up for that one?
Yeah, I can take. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There a lot of dams out there that are not really providing good bang for the buck in terms of electricity and relative to the impacts that they have on salmon and other values. There've been some really exciting dam removal projects in the United States. I think of it every day when I go out and walk my dog on the beach here in Victoria, and I look across to the Elwha Valley and the Olympic Peninsula, where they took out 2 big old obsolete dams, and the Chinook salmon are now reclaiming the river, and it's really exciting. I think, you know, the reason we're focusing on flood control infrastructure in the Lower Fraser Valley is that we see that as really a huge habitat connectivity issue for salmon. But there are, you know, there's the Coquitlam Dam where we're working with the Queequetlam Nation to restore sockeye there, and I mean, we need fish passage around that dam, and you know, it's supplying drinking water for Metro Vancouver, so it's not going to get removed. But yeah, there are some problematic dams in BC for sure, and we, yeah, you know, we shouldn't be building new ones, in my opinion.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, so there's a question that I want an answer to as well, a general one. Is there the ability to volunteer with the groups that you all represent, or help with the implementation of the cleanup efforts? Maybe Dionne, maybe we'll start with you and then go Dan and Aaron.
Sure. I mean, yes, always any help is welcome. You know, many First Nations don't have the capacity to kind of do all the projects that they'd like to actually implement. So any help is always welcome. So if anyone wants to volunteer, I'm most happy to kind of chat with them and see what they're interested in. You can email me, and I can put you in touch with the right project or people. So yes, always welcome any kind of help. Just to kind of one more point I'd like to make about the previous question on agricultural runoff. It's a huge issue that affects water quality and invasives, and you know, there's especially in the Agassiz area and in the Fraser Canyon, this is I mean, not canyon, the valley, it's a huge issue. It has prevented many nations from actually implementing restoration projects that they wanted to implement. So, you know, for example, Stahelis has been working with the District of Kent to try to do some restoration projects, but it's hindered by the lack of access to these agricultural lands. So there's definitely some policy issues around there that need to be addressed so that these hurdles to kind of restoration projects are cleared. just an additional thought.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. Dan, do you want to answer the next question about volunteering, and then we'll pass it over to Erin?
Yeah, my answer is not going to be very exciting. There's not really a lot of opportunities to get involved unless you're providing some kind of expertise. Like if you have some expertise in terms of knowledge about the area or of streams or projects, then please do reach out. At the current moment, and I'd say also partly because of COVID, it's very hard to do kind of on the ground meetings and that kind of thing. So that might change in future years, but it's very hard to involve volunteers in an integrated way.
Thank you.
Yeah, for our part, we love volunteers. It's definitely an important part of what we do, and as Dan mentioned, it is quite challenging with COVID to take in volunteers in a safe way and give them fulfilling and productive things to do. But we're still trying. There's a lot of stuff to do from an advocacy perspective, even if we can't go out and do field work together right now. And certainly when this COVID situation is under control, we'll be going back to doing things like water quality testing and garbage route cleanups and other field work, planting in riparian zones. And but the advocacy stuff, that there's always a need for that. So get in touch with us. It's email is engagement@watershedwatch.ca or Lena at watershedwatch.ca. We can try to find something for you to do.
Great.
Maybe just to plug, like if you're really interested in on the ground stuff, then local stream keepers organizations are great, and Fraser Valley Watersheds Coalition, that is kind of in the upper side of the Fraser, east of Abbotsford, west of Hope, does this kind of stuff on the ground. And I don't know what their situation is looking for volunteers right now, but thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. So we have 3 more minutes and 2 questions that are quite related. So I'm going to ask them at the same time. So one individual notes, and I'll put them together, but essentially it's about water temperature. One individual notes, further to water storage, could man-made glaciers, ice stupas, in brackets used for irrigation and water in desert-like areas, for example, the Himalayas, be a solution to storing water in the upper Fraser watersheds while cooling it? And the other related question is, how is temperature increase going to be managed for the river? And that massive question I will just leave for anybody who wants to take it.
I haven't heard of any kind of man-made management of glaciers in this part of the world, but I have heard of it, as mentioned, in the Himalayas. It's been a kind of a local solution, and yeah, I'm not sure how effective it is on a large scale. And in terms of how we're going to manage for water temperature, a very easy kind of thing is to actually just improve vegetation cover in riparian areas. That cools down, the shading cools down the streams. And because so many of our streams don't have adequate riparian buffers, the stream temperatures are way higher than they could be with the right vegetation in place. So that's a very easy solution that is nature-based and would be very effective.
Thank you, Dionne. In the final minute, is there anything else that Dan or Erin you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, just really good points from Dionne, and I just sort of add that, like, further across the watershed, forestry is a big issue, and we're by removing so much of the forest cover through clear-cut logging, we're really reducing the ability to buffer snowmelt as the climate warms, and so that's really exacerbating the severity of the flooding, and then the severity of the droughts in the summer. And so that'd be a good thing to get on top of throughout the watershed, and in other watersheds as well, not just the Fraser. And then the Kenny Dam is a pretty big issue, and the diversion of Fraser River water through the Camano project, where I grew up. And it's a huge amount of, I think it's roughly 3% of the Fraser's flow, ballpark, I could be slightly off on that gets diverted to the coast through the Camano project. So that does have an impact on water temperatures in the summer, especially in the Nechako, where the proportion is really significant. And so the cold water releases, the releases from the spillway are really important there, and just over extraction of water in general. I think we need to get on with the licensing of groundwater removals through the Water Sustainability Act, and putting in getting tough on big users, over extractors of water, to drive forward more water conservation, so that there is more water in our rivers and streams for fish, especially during drought times.
Thank you, Aaron. I think that's a good way to end the webinar. Have some nice ideas of actions people can take and ways to move forward. So thank you so much, Dan, Aaron, and Dionne, for your presentations and your present today, and the work that you've put into this, and the answers you've answered on the fly at the end. And thank you to our attendees as well. We had almost 200 folks join us today, and we have more than half of that still on the line, even though we're a couple minutes over time. So thanks for joining. Thanks for your questions and your presence, and joining in today. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.